Chapter 7, Swim. It was Billy's junior year at the Matilde Nelson School for Girls, where tuition was over $30,000 a year. Amma and Omar had arranged it all, from her application to the full scholarship ride to the wardrobe bag of crisp, brand new uniforms that had arrived at her house 2 weeks before school started. Unlike Perry and Olivia, at age 17, Billy couldn't care less about clothes. She read that Steve Jobs wore a black turtleneck and jeans every day, and that the space it opened in his mind enabled him to create the iPhone. She wanted to be a scientist. She wanted to make sure there was plenty of room in her brain to create great things. The navy blue turtleneck and charcoal gray tartan skirts that were the Nelson School uniform weren't exactly jobs worthy, but it felt like a start. The Matilde Nelson School had a heated Olympic-sized indoor swimming pool. Emma had suggested that Billy try out for the swim team. Billy loved to swim. She had learned to swim like the rest of Emma's girls during the summers on the vineyard. Omar would take them to the Inkwell, a beach whose name had began as a slur in the 1890s, as whites nicknamed the stretch of segregated beach allotted to blacks. A century later, the Inkwell had kept its name, but the world had changed. Black was beautiful, once and decidedly for all, and local residents used the name Inkwell as a point of pride. This stretch of beach and ocean was theirs. No milk was necessary for all that coffee. It was there that Omar patiently and diligently taught each girl how to tread water, how to swim underwater, then how to dive. Perry didn't care much for ocean swimming, and Olivia was perpetually concerned about what the water might do to her hair. But for Billy, the ocean felt more like home than any place she'd ever been on land. Omar had promised that one day he'd take her scuba diving. She wanted to go to the depths of the ocean where the water went so dark you needed a light in order to see. She met Whitney Bowen the first day of swim team practice. Billy was tall for her age, with wiry muscles that wrapped like rope under her baby soft skin. Whitney was shorter, with more of a bust and more curves, but she was also strong. Billy admired the muscles in both her arms and legs. The swim team was surprisingly diverse. Besides Billy and Whitney, there were two other black girls, Josie, who was from the Bahamas and spoke with a lilting Caribbean accent, and Lindsay, who transferred in from Colorado. The four of them quickly formed a posse. They ate lunch together, they studied together, and 5 days a week they practiced together. The swim team practice schedule was intense. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 3 to 5 p.m., Tuesdays and Thursdays from 6 to 8 a.m., and meets on Saturdays. Often on Friday nights, the four girls spent the night together so that only one parent had to drive them to the early morning meet. The first weekend in May, Billy found herself alone at Whitney's. Josie's grandmother was visiting from the Bahamas, and Lindsay had caught the flu and wasn't going to compete. Billy had never been alone with Whitney overnight before, and yet the minute she realized that the other two girls were not coming, she found herself hoping that something romantic might happen between the two of them. And the thought of it took her by surprise. She hadn't had any crushes on boys, but she thought that was a function of going to girls' school. Her interactions with boys consisted mostly of awkward conversations at intramural mixes and the painfully shy boys who crowded the comic book shop where her father worked. Perry and Olivia talked about boys all the time who they had kissed, who they had let get to first or second base. Both of the older girls had made it clear that you couldn't let a boy slide into third, not in high school, not if you were a good girl. In their parlance, as much as Billy had understood it, boys were always on the offense and girls were on the defense. A boy is always going to try, Perry said dramatically, swinging on one of the posts of her four-poster bed as if it were a ship's mast and she were a sail. But you've got to hold your ground. Perry and Olivia didn't discuss their own desire, the kind of longing for touch that Billy felt, it seemed, all the time. In their hands, it was much more of a game of chess than seduction. The preferred balance of power was for a very handsome boy to like you much more than you liked him. If that was the case, then everything was golden. No one ever asked Billy if she liked boys, if she wanted a boy to kiss her, or to try to get to first. They assumed her desires were the same as theirs. "You'll see," Oli said, with the slightly superior tisk-tisk voice that was her trademark. "It's all so tricky for boys." Now, as she stood in the entryway of Whitney's apartment, she wondered, what about girls? Was it just as tricky? How did it work? She pondered, pretending to have forgotten something important. Her goggles, her racing suit, flip-flops for the shower. Billy wanted to go home and Google it. How do two girls make out? What's first base with two girls? What's second? If she went home, she could buy a book online and download it to her Kindle. Her dad never supervised what she read. As long as you're reading, he'd say, all I ever read was comic books. And look at me, Then she would answer, bona fide genius. Billy searched Whitney's face for some flash of recognition of what she was feeling, but her friend seemed unaware. Whit was her same beautiful, bubbly self. My mom says we can order from Grimaldi's for dinner. Cool, Billy said. And I'm so behind on Top Chef. The show had quickly become popular among the circle of high school friends. Me too, Billy said. Let's throw your stuff into my room, Whitney said, and Billy followed her down the long hallway to the bedroom at the end. Whitney's parents, Yvonne and Ray, were having dinner 2 floors down at their neighbor's place. Whitney's father was a contractor. He'd worked with the architect who designed the building they lived in. Otherwise, we'd never be able to afford digs like this, he once said, and Billy was aware that Whitney's condo was like something out of a movie. Billy and her father lived in a tiny 2-bedroom railroad flat in Queens. Their building was more than 100 years old. Billy's father had grown up in an identical building just a few blocks away. Whitney's mother was a dermatologist with a ton of celebrity clients. She and Whitney shared the same perfect TV commercial skin, and she was always giving the girls on the swim team samples of super expensive moisturizers she got for free. The pool is so drying on your skin, she'd exclaim. Billy noted that her dad could not care less about things like face cream. He kept Dr. Bronner's Pure Castile soap in the shower, a jar of Palmer's cocoa butter next to the toothpaste, and a bottle of Carol's Daughter hair milk next to the brush and comb in the bathroom. That was it for him in grooming. That evening, Whitney's mother was dressed in a pretty cashmere sweater leggings, and expensive-looking sneakers. Because Billy had never met her own mother, she studied other mothers, wondering what her mother might have been like if she had lived. Her father told her it was less studying and more like staring. Hearing his voice in her head, she shyly looked away. "You girls have fun tonight," Yvonne said. "Just text if you need us." An hour later, the two girls were sitting cross-legged on the living room floor. They had agreed without argument on ordering the Colony, which was a red sauce pizza with pepperoni, pickled jalapenos, and honey that was delicious, but not as good as Emma's. It didn't sound like it should be so tasty, but it was. She had no idea why they all watched the Great British Bake Off on British TV. None of them actually baked, but it was fun to watch something so silly happening an ocean away. Billy especially loved the British accents. It might also have been true that watching the contestants fumble and fail took the edge off of the competition that awaited them the next day. Matilda Nelson was ranked number 2 in their division. It was a pressure valve position. So many teams wanted to knock them off that vaunted perch, and yet the gulf between their spot and the number 1 ranked school, High Tech, seemed insurmountable. It was like the difference between being number 1 and number 2 was greater than the distance between being number 2 and 23. In her head, Billy pictured herself relaxing in the water. She tried to picture every stroke and imagined her arms reaching even longer, her legs moving with greater and greater force. She was doing the 200-yard freestyle. Their coach, Liz, was a big fan of visualizations. After dinner, the girls cleaned up and went to Whitney's room. Whitney's phone buzzed and she looked at it. "My parents said we should go ahead and get ready for bed. They'll be out for a while." Whitney had her own bathroom attached to her bedroom. She called it an en-suite. It was as fancy as it sounded. It had a rainforest shower, a slate gray marble floor, and a little niche with a dressing table and light. "Do you want to shower first?" Whitney asked. They always showered the night before a meet. The next morning, they'd get up at 5, quickly blend a smoothie, and be in the car by 5:45. "Sure," Billy said. She took her overnight bag into the bathroom along with the giant plush bath sheet that Whitney's mother had laid out on the guest bed. She couldn't remember the last time her father had bought new towels. Theirs were so raggedy and thin, she'd have to try to convince him to get some new ones from Target. She turned on the shower, as hot as she could take it, and let the window steam completely. She pictured herself in the pool the next morning. She needed to drown out the sounds of the room. She needed to pretend she was alone in the pool, that the only person she was racing was herself. Her eyes were closed, and the shower smelled of the fancy eucalyptus soap Whitney's family liked to use. She stepped out of the shower, got into her pajamas, and opened the bathroom door. "It's all yours," she said. "Thanks," Whitney said. Then she kissed Billy, ever so softly on the lips. Billy instantly felt like she was back on the vineyard, the first time she dived off the Jaws Bridge. She felt the same mix of joy and exhilaration when she felt herself suspended in midair. Of course, she thought, as she kissed Whit back, it was so easy, so simple, so good. Her coach used to say, "A journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step." It only made sense that this journey of passion, of touch, of pleasure, would begin with a single kiss.